Hi, everybody, and welcome to SneakCon 2021 and Partner Day 2021. This is the How to Win with Snyk in a Competitive Situation presentation. My name is Jim Armstrong, so I'm part of the product marketing team here at Snyk. Specifically, I work on Snyk Container and Snyk IAC today. I'm going to be joined today by Daniel Berman, who covers our platform as a whole, as well as Snyk Open Source, and Frank Fisher, who covers Snyk Code. Now, before I dive into our own kind of opinion about our competitive differentiators, I thought I'd start with a third-party independent opinion about our competitive differentiators, using Gartner as our source for that in their latest Magic Quadrant for application security testing. Now, Gartner covered many different aspects of application security in this latest report. So not just the traditional SAST and SCA type tools, they included container, they included infrastructure as code. They also included several other aspects of application security. So a really very comprehensive report. We're really pleased with our debut on the Magic Quadrant, finishing high up in the Visionaries Quadrant, knocking at the door of that leaders quadrant. So for our first time on the quadrant, we're really pleased with where we showed up there. As a whole, what Gartner said about application security testing is that more and more of this is moving in this direction to support DevOps and really to empower developers to handle more of the security issues on their own, right, without slowing down development. All of which, is very close to what Snyk says, right, about our own products, what we've said basically since day one. Specifically on their analysis of Snyk, what they've called out is our strengths here, is our alignment with that vision, with that move towards more DevOps, what enterprises go through when they hit this sort of digital transformation. And so again, we feel like they understand our story very well. They understand how this fits in the market very well. And, we are completely thrilled with that analysis. Now, for every vendor, Gartner provides, positives and some negatives. And so what they said about Snyk on the negative side, slightly negative, I think, is that, if you're a more traditional development shop, you have more waterfall style development, and you have dedicated security professionals who you expect to handle issues instead of developers, then perhaps Snyk is not the right tool for you. We don't really disagree with that statement at all. We reframe it slightly and say, look, if you're in a traditional shop, if you haven't started to embrace these DevOps practices, these more tech-forward practices where developers are responsible for security, then probably, yes, Snyk is not the right tool for those environments. But we think, and I think Gartner also says this as well, more and more of those shops, more and more of those applications, as they get monetized, are embracing those DevOps practices, and that's where Snyk really is a fit. So it's a growing market on our side, and we think a shrinking market on the other side. Now, several of our competitors are covered in the Magic Quadrant as well. There's some here that we don't really see all that often in competitive situations, but a few that we do see fairly often. Just to highlight a couple of these, we'll get into more details as we go through the presentation. Checkmarx was on here. We see checkmarks quite often. We'll spend a bit of time talking about checkmarks in this presentation today, but really sort of the negatives on checkmarks. Complexity, I think, is one of them, but also the high cost. Again, I think kind of owing to the more traditional security background there, and security tools tend to be fairly expensive anyway. As we shift more to developer focus, those tools are a little bit out of line in terms of cost. I wanted to call out GitHub and GitLab here. They showed up on the Magic Quadrant this year. Both have started to add some security testing, application security testing tools. It's very similar in the fact that these are extremely developer-centric tools obviously this is where code is stored. It's what a developer sees every day. They've taken slightly different tactics in terms of how they deliver features. GitHub has taken sort of a light approach to security. They've acquired a couple of companies, and that was sort of called out here. They're sort of limited in what they offer and really chosen to sort of embrace more of a marketplace where third parties can come in and provide more of those tools. GitLab, on the other hand, has chosen to take a bunch of different open source tools and combine them in. So they're not really focused on developing their own sort of intellectual property all that much, or on partnerships all that much, instead taking open source tools and kind of bundling in the reported information there. But it is a big collection of different tools that come in from there. The knock on again on both of these two is that they're focused on exactly what you would see within those environments, right? So if you're in an IDE and you're not in GitHub or GitLab, then you don't really get any results. If you're in CI/CD and it's a third-party CI/CD and not something that GitHub and GitLab offer directly, you don't see the results, and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of the limitation for them as well. It happens to be their strength and their weakness at the same time. So that's what Gartner says about the market. Let's talk a little bit about how we analyze ourselves and how we set ourselves up for competitive differentiation. A couple of really important angles that we look at here. These are just two out of many, but the two that we'll kind of focus on a little bit more today. First is completeness of the platform. What does a particular competitor offer outside of one silo? Just SAST or just SEA or just container, et cetera. Who covers multiple areas and does that really well in multiple areas? Now, of course, there are loads of areas of application security testing that Snyk doesn't cover, at least not yet. And so we're aware of those things too. We take that all into account. But we'll talk a little bit about that first. We're going to spend the bulk of the presentation on what a developer needs, or what is a real developer tool versus a security tool, because this aspect of shifting left we think is really important to differentiate between actually empowering a developer to handle security versus just taking a security tool and throwing it over the fence and expecting a developer to do something with it. So if we spend a minute here on platform coverage first, and then we'll get into the developer tools. Again, for each individual product, we see slightly different competitors that come up in conversations around that product. In the SAST world, we see checkmarks and Veracode come up pretty often. Most of these lists are more or less ranked in terms of how often we see these competitors. With SEA, White Source, Synopsys come up a lot. We see GitHub and GitLab kind of across the board for those two. With container, it's a very different set of competitors. Almost all of our competitors there are very runtime security focused instead of developer focused, which is where Snyk is, but nonetheless, they come up as competitors for us. And then of course, infrastructure as code, a new and burgeoning area where we're seeing a lot of movement in the market, acquisitions and people bringing in open source tools and those kinds of things. So more and more names pop up. Now, one thing you will notice is that there are several names that do kind of come up across the board here, right? So checkmarks covers, will claim a lot of coverage for these things. Sonatype I listed here because they will claim coverage for all of these things. GitLab, GitHub, even Palo Alto and Aqua starting to claim, support for multiple areas of the platform. And that's where we start to get into, are these really developer tools? Are they empowering a developer to do something, or are they, more of a traditional security tool that happens to be providing information that's just shifted left? And that's really the next thing that sets us apart. And so we're going to spend a lot of time on that. And so to set that up, I want to talk a little bit about what those differences are. If you've seen many presentations from Snyk, you've probably seen a slide that looks like this where we talk about shifting left not being enough. The underpinnings of that being that you cannot just take a security tool that provides a risk report and send that to a developer and hope that they'll do something with it. That is shifting left of the security tools, but it is not providing a developer with the information that they need to actually fix things, right? It's a very different audience and a very different set of needs that they have from their tools. And so it doesn't really do well to hand a developer tool to a security person or a security tool to a developer person. So merely shifting your tools to the left is not enough for a developer. What a security person is looking at is the overall risk of the environment. They need to audit things, right? They need the big picture. Any individual application is just one point of light in that risk report, but they're really looking beyond any individual application to the entire environment to know what's happening and to know where the risks are and to shut down those risks. Developers, on the other hand, are in the business of creating a better application. Performance, scalability, and security are all aspects of that, and they need to continue to improve their code, and that includes improving the security. So they're there to fix issues when they're discovered. Very different needs that they have out of those tools. And so again, this is where we start to see the differentiation between something like what Snyk does and what some of these other tools do. So We're going to start this session by looking at Snyk code. We're going to cover all of Snyk's products here. I'm going to hand things off to Frank first, who's going to cover Snyk code. Then we'll go to Daniel, and I'll come back at the end to handle containers and IAC and to wrap up the session. Frank, take it away.
Hello, my name is Frank Fischer, and I am the product marketing manager of one of the youngest products in the Snyk portfolio, Snyk code. Snyk code is a static application security testing, or SAST solution, and it is no less than revolutionizing the market. Traditionally, SAST is seen as an audit tool. Nice if you are interested in the statistics as an auditor. Not so helpful if you are the developer tasked to actually fix issues. Snyk code makes SAST useful. So how do we do it? Snyk code is less than a year on the market, but it has hit a sweet spot. It is based on a unique set of technologies combining traditional AI and machine learning to learn from the knowledge of the global developer community. By this, it is able to exponentially grow language support, and it is extremely fast moving. Snyk code was designed with the developer in mind, and as such addresses the 3 chief complaints why developers don't like traditional SASTs. Like the 3 musketeers, the following 3 arguments are winners in the fight for our customers' hearts and minds. First, we have developer friendliness. This means Snyk code embeds itself into the developer workflow. Being in the IDE, fast scans, results are explained within the code, providing data flow diagrams, automated PR checks, just to name a few things. So competitor SAST is living in the security team. Snyk code is a developer solution. Next, Snyk code is fast. And I mean fast. Instead of hours, days, or even weeks, scans takes seconds to minutes. We compared Snyk code with other competitors and found it is up to 100 times faster. Don't believe me? Try it yourself. You have to imagine a developer being flooded by security with thousands of possible security issues, every issue taking significant effort just to find half of it is actually a false alarm. Traditional vendors left it to the customer to fix the problem and called it a feature, custom rule sets. Snyk code uses its unique process to take the load of the customer and produces ever-increasing accuracy. So there you have it, the 3 winning arguments. Developer friendly, fast, and accurate. No competitor in the market comes even close. Or as one of our customers puts it, you brought back my love in static analysis. I want to invite you to join Snyk in the mission to bring back this love to millions of developers. With this, thank you for your time. I hand over to my colleague, Daniel Berman, to talk about dependencies, and bye for me.
Thank you, Frank, and hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Berman. I'm Product Marketing Director for Snyk Open Source and Snyk Platform. And I'd like to start with a simple fact, and that is that between 80 to 90% of an application's code base is actually open source code. And that's because developers today are pulling in more and more open source packages to build their applications. And this, of course, introduces risk in the shape and form of known vulnerabilities in these open source packages. Now, it gets a bit more complicated than that because 80% of these vulnerabilities are actually identified in transitive dependencies, open source packages that are brought in by other open source packages as their dependents. And these dependencies can go several layers deep in an application. So from a developer's perspective, to actually be able to take action and fix these issues, it's not enough to be presented with a long list of all the vulnerabilities identified in their application. They need to get a clear view as to the dependency tree in order to be able to understand how exactly these vulnerable packages ended up in their application to start with, and how best to fix them without causing too many breaking changes. And this is a key area where Snyk open source really shines in comparison to our competition. When an issue is identified, it's presented in a very, very clear way. So developers know exactly how the vulnerable package was actually introduced and how to fix the issue without causing too much damage. So in the example we're seeing here, it wouldn't be of much use or help to the developer if we told him that he had a high severity vulnerability in the negotiator package. This is a transitive dependency. In all likelihood, the developer had no clue he was even using this package to start with. So instead, Snyk Open Source, with the help of a full dependency tree, is telling the developer how this vulnerability actually entered the application, how it was introduced, in this case via the error handler package, and points the developer to the actual fix needed. And of course, provides that next step, a button that will open a pull request to fix the issue. And this saves a lot of development time and is a key difference between Snyk's approach to remediation and what our competitors are providing. Now, vulnerabilities tend to pile up into endless backlogs consisting of hundreds, if not thousands, of vulnerabilities. And so prioritization becomes really, really critical. Short on time and resources, development and security teams need an easy and quick way to go through the backlog and decide where to focus their efforts for the best impact. Now, most of Snyk's competitors make do with providing really basic prioritization capabilities, mainly based on CVSS severity scoring. But Snyk Open Source goes well beyond that, provides a wide suite of prioritization capabilities with a lot of context and a lot of security intelligence. For example, Snyk Open Source will inform the user whether a specific vulnerability is trending on Twitter or not, or whether the vulnerability is actually reachable as part of the application's workflow. And it takes these signals together with some additional signals and calculates them in a priority score, which is displayed within the Snyk user interface. Again, enabling development and security teams to sift through their backlog and reach more effective prioritization decisions. Now, all of the security goodness is powered by Snyk Intel, Snyk's vulnerability database, which has proven to be more comprehensive, more accurate, and more timely in comparison to public data sources or some competitive solutions. Based on Snyk's dedicated research team and our technology and some feedback and input and work together with the community, all of those ensure that this database contains more unique vulnerabilities, that it gets them in faster than our competitors, and that the actual information within the database is actionable and accurate. Now, don't take my word for it, because all of our competitors claim that they have the best vulnerability database out there. But there's some really objective facts that validate Snyk's unique position. Probably the most important one being that some leading technology companies and security platforms have chosen Snyk Intel and Snyk's vulnerability database to power their own solutions. So companies like Google, Datadog, IBM, Trend Micro have evaluated the vulnerability database and chosen to use that as their backend instead of building their own proprietary database. So that's it from me at this point. Back to you, Jim.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so let's get into containers a little bit next. Again, let's talk a little bit about security for containers and what a security person might need for containers versus what a developer needs. Again, every container tool out there will provide a vulnerability list, right? And that vulnerability list, if you're a security person, is important. How many vulnerabilities overall, how many are critical, how many have an exploit in the wild, but more importantly, how does that plug into the rest of the environment? Is the Kubernetes cluster configured correctly? What does this application talk to on the network? Is the entire, are there gateways and firewalls and things that are out there that will protect this environment? So there's a lot of different aspects beyond just any individual container that a security person is worried about when it comes to the overall risk of the environment. The opposite is true for a developer. A developer might look at a list of 500 vulnerabilities, but it's very hard to reason about what to do with a container based off of that list. It really doesn't provide any information that a developer needs. First of all, a developer can't do anything about 500 individual vulnerabilities. They just don't have the time to tackle those things, even if you knew a fix for every single one of those. What they need is something that actually relates to how that container is built and something that a developer understands, which is the code that determines how that container is built. Most often, that's a Docker file. And so instead of listing out the 500 vulnerabilities, they just need to know how to fix those. And if possible, fix a bunch of them at once. And that's what Snyk has really focused on with Snyk Container. It's why we consider it to be a developer-focused container tool as opposed to a runtime security tool. So again, the idea here is that we can look at a container, we can tell you how that container was built, all the components that made up that container, and how to switch out those components to fix a container quickly, right? So we're seeing an example of a base image recommendation that will fix 500 vulnerabilities just with one line of code being changed in the Docker file. And we can even automate that code change for a developer. That's something that no other container security tool provides, right? So that's the type of information the developer needs. What those 500 vulnerabilities are behind the scenes, less important really to a developer. The fact that I can make one line of change and get to the, get that reduction, that's something that's interesting, right? So being able to detect those things, relate those back to things that a developer understands about a container. I know how my container was built. I know what the base image was, and now you're just telling me I can change the base image and fix those things. That makes sense. A list of 500 vulnerabilities doesn't really help me because I don't know all the bits and pieces that are sitting there under the covers. Again, the other idea here is providing that information where the developers actually work and in the tools that they use every day. So we start with everything all the way over to the desktops. We're built into Docker's own tools as the security scanner. So anybody using Docker tools has Snyk embedded into their system already. We're going to see at SnyKCon this week, we're starting to work on IDE support. That's completely unique. I don't know anybody else in the industry that's providing those types of vulnerability scan details inside the IDE, especially with the fix information. Again, you can find a tool, I'm sure, that provide the list of 500 vulnerabilities, but how do I get directly to that fix and relate that back to what's in my Docker file? That's something that's totally unique. So we start all the way at that developer's desktop. We of course scan in any Git repo. Again, that's a bit unique. Most people are just looking at a container image. Nobody is really looking at the Docker file and worrying about the vulnerabilities and how to fix that Docker file to create a better image. So very unique to Snyk. And of course, it ties into the developer experience overall. Of course, we can scan in CI. This is where every container tool starts to talk about shifting left as being able to scan in CI. But again, providing those developer-focused results, even into production, right? As we start to look at running containers, which Snyk does do, right? We stop short of saying we're a runtime tool, but we actually do scan running containers for vulnerabilities. But the idea there, again, is to reflect that back on things that a developer actually has control over and can fix. So the container image itself, how that application is configured in the cluster, how that relates back to the vulnerabilities that they're seeing, and tying those two things together. So again, something the developer has direct control over for their applications. It's a bit of a different view than what a lot of our competitors are providing. And from that view, then, we talked about base image and fixing the base image, which, as we saw, can fix a massive number of issues just with a simple, push of a button. But you're still going to be left with vulnerabilities, and we want to help a developer reason about which are the ones that are most important to take care of. The severity of a vulnerability, of course, is important, but if it's running in a cluster, that makes it more important to look at. If there are exploits available, that makes it more important from a developer's perspective. And we want to relate it, again, back to something that they know how to fix. So we'll show things like the layer information, the Docker file instructions that they need to go to if they want to actually make this change and change and fix how that container runs. So again, trying to keep it simple and easily, searchable, and something that a developer can just, take and use directly. All right, switching gears a little bit to infrastructure as code. Same sort of idea here. Again, if you're looking at infrastructure and you've been looking at infrastructure for any amount of time as a security person, you're very much interested in that audit of the environment. What are all the doors and windows that are open? How do people get in? What can they get to? What sort of availability do they have? What sort of confidential information might somebody get to? Those are all the sorts of lenses that you have as a security person on this environment. Now, the flip side is true as a developer. Again, you're creating the configuration here. It might be Kubernetes configuration. It might be Terraform configuration. The format is less important. That your desired goal for that is to make your application run well. So now there are security problems there, and you may not be all that versed as a developer in what those security problems are. You may not care all that much about what the security problems are. If it changes how your application works, that's important to you. But then getting directly to how you fix it, instead of just getting an audit report for the whole environment, is also very important as a developer. So that's where Snyk infrastructure as code really plays. Again, providing developers information they need to fix things, to show them what the impact is, and get directly to a fix. And again, we want to make that as easy as possible to do as early as you can when you're creating these configurations. So you can scan it right away at your own, from your own machine. You can start to expose the problems there and fix them right away. We talked about the IDE that we're going to be showing this week at SnykCon. So we've got IDE support on the way for Snyk IEC. So you just see that directly and automatically within your IDEs as a developer. We already can scan, in all of your source code repositories. And of course, we can scan in CI/CD. So again, the idea here really is providing that information on how to fix these issues before anything gets deployed. Again, loads of audit tools that are out there for infrastructure. Those audit tools fall short of, not really getting back to the actual code that creates the infrastructure. So if you just run an audit tool, you're going to get a picture of the risk, but you're going to have a hard time describing to a developer where they need to go to fix that issue, as opposed to what we're trying to do here with Snyk IEC, which is get directly into the code that you're creating as a developer and show you how to fix those issues straight away. Go straight to this line, make this change, and that will fix this particular issue for you. So that's where Snyk IEC is focused. And then just to kind of wrap things up here, again, the idea here with all of Snyk's products really is that we don't just want to talk about shifting left in and of itself, right? Again, loads of security tools are attempting to shift further to the left. All that's doing is providing security-focused views that just happen to appear earlier in your pipelines. Security, somebody from a security team, a security specialist, is going to have to go through those reports, triage that information, and hand it to a developers, and that doesn't really scale. And that's the problem that people are running into. What we also want to do, in addition to shifting left, is divide up that responsibility. So it's not just something that somebody over in, sitting way up in the security tower can handle, but that everybody can handle, from a development perspective. And that's really what Snyk's focus is. That's really where we think the industry is going. It's aligned with what Gartner says. And so that's really the main differentiator that we use when we get into competitive situations. So I hope all that is helpful and useful to you. Again, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat panel. Daniel, Frank, and I are all here to answer your questions. Enjoy the rest of SnykCon and the rest of Partner Day. Thanks, everybody.